Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our way through Far's Homeric Greek, a book for beginners. We're now in lesson 19 and exploring the infinitive forms of the verb. So, the infinitive is in part a verb and in part a substantive. It's what's actually called a verbal noun. So, as mine says here, many substantives are closely related to verbs, but not all verbs can form substantives. All verbs, however, can form infinitives. And here's the essential part. The word infinitive denotes a verbal form without limitations of number or person. So the infinitive represents just the idea of the action, not attached to an I, a you, or a plural, or a singular. It just is the notion of the verb itself. So luain, to release, pugain, to flee, as opposed to the finite forms of the verbs that are characterized by number and person. So, the infinitive, like I say, is a verbal noun, but it is also by some considered to be a mood. As Mike says, there are four moods: indicative, subjunctive, optative, and imperative, and these are called finite moods. The indicative, the subjunctive, the optative, and imperative are called finite because the person is defined by the ending. The infinitive, which is strictly a verbal noun, is sometimes classed as a mood as well. Now, verbal nouns are verbal forms that share certain properties of nouns, and these are called verbal nouns. There are two kinds of verbal nouns: the substantival verbal noun, the infinitive, and the adjectival verbal noun, the participle, which we'll be learning about soon. But right now, we're just looking at the infinitive. Now, the infinitive is like a verb in that it shows distinctions of voice and tense, but not those of number and person. And having tenses, it can express different stages of action. Action simply occurring, action continuing, or action finished. Whereas this corresponding substantive sets forth the abstract idea without these distinctions. Contrast poiein, to make, poiesein, to be about to make, poiesai, to just having finished, occurring, made, and pepoiekenai, having made, with poiesis, which is a noun, which is just making. So these four infinitive forms: poiein, present; poiesein, future; poiesai, aorist; and pepoiekenai, perfect, will represent different stages of action, as we'll see in a second. B. The infinitive can have a subject before it and a predicate after it, and it can have an object in the genitive, dative, or accusative, like this corresponding finite verb. Infinitives scarcely ever stand in the subjective genitive, and the object of an infinitive never stands in the objective genitive. Thirdly, the infinitive is like a verb insofar as it is modified by adverbs, not by adjectives. So how is the infinitive like a noun? The infinitive is like a substantive in that A, it may be the subject or object of a verb. I can say, to ride a horse is fun, or to ride a horse thrills me. B, with the neuter article, it shows all the case forms except the vocative. Ta, to, toi, ta, luain, lusain, etc. This is a structure called the articular infinitive, which does not really appear in Homer, but is very popular with, say, Demosthenes and Thucydides in later Greek. These speakers of oratory who want to make very fancy structures. And then thirdly, an infinitive is like a substantive insofar as it may be governed by prepositions. Pro to luain. And there, pro to luain, to luain is an articular infinitive. That is an infinitive with the definite article, the neuter form of the article in front of it. But like I say, you see those in later Greek, not in Homer. Now, as for the tenses of the infinitive that we spoke of quickly, this is Farr's nice summation of it. 1. The only tenses which occur in the infinitive are the present, the future, the aorist, the perfect, and the future perfect. So again, the only tenses that occur in the infinitive are the present, the future, the aorist, the perfect, and the future perfect. The middle and the passive differ in form in the aorist only. So that means otherwise, outside of the aorist, you will have the middle forms doing the work of the passive in the infinitive. Number 2. In the subjunctive, optative, imperative, and infinitive, the tenses do not themselves indicate time. They indicate what is called aspect. So the present in these moods denotes an action as simply as continued. That means like a video, it's ongoing. The aorist denotes an action simply as brought to pass. It's like a photo, it just is something that has happened. And the perfect denotes an action simply as completed. So present, ongoing, aorist, incidental, perfect, completed. These are the aspects that are represented in the tense of the infinitive. And we will look at this more closely when we actually come across examples. Now, the infinitive endings are wonderfully simple in that there are only 4 possible endings for infinitives. And so we see that you have A, B, C, D, epsilon nu, N, I, alpha iota, Ni, nu alpha iota, and then sigma, theta, alpha iota. So each of these endings attaches itself to various tenses. So epsilon nu occurs in the present and second aorist active of verbs in omega and in all futures active. Alpha iota, B, occurs in the first aorist active. C, nu alpha iota occurs in the present, in the second perfect of mid verbs, in the 2 passive aorists, and in the perfect active. And all others besides that take D, sigma, theta, iota. Sigma, theta, alpha iota, excuse me. So we will look at these one by one now. So let's look at the present system. We have 4 tenses: the present active, the future, the present middle passive, the future middle passive. Okay? So if you look at these infinitives, for the present, it's luain. For the future active, it's lusain. For the present middle passive, it's luestai. And for the future, it's lucestai. So you see, in this case, you have ain or stai added to the tense stem, respectively. Moving to the imperfect. The imperfect actually just employs the present infinitives. So those are just the forms of the present infinitive. But if we look at the first aorist, in the active, you have the alpha iota ending added to the tense stem. So lu psi. And in the middle, you have lu sa stai. For the second aorist, you have lipain, and it's a giveaway that the accent is the circumflex on the final last syllable, lipain. And for the middle of the second aorist, lipestai. And again, the accent not being recessive, but on the epsilon, the second from the last syllable, is specific and an indicator that you're dealing with a second aorist. As far as the first aorist and future passive and second aorist passive, you see here for the first aorist passive and the second aorist passive, you have the ending of the infinitive as nu alpha iota. So lutenai and blabenai are your first and second aorist passive infinitives. But for your first future passive and second future passive, you have the estai ending, lute sestai and blabe sestai. For your perfect, your first perfect and pluperfect, you have for the first perfect active, le lucanai, so the ending nu alpha iota. And for your pluperfect active, that, just like the imperfect employed the present infinitive, so too the pluperfect employs the perfect infinitive to do its work. So those do double duty. In the middle of the first perfect, you have le lustai, and in the future perfect, you have le lusestai. In the second perfect, you have again the nu alpha iota, le loi benai, and the second pluperfect will employ that same form. So what I recommend that you do is that you get yourself 3x5 little flashcards and write out the indicative forms of each of these tenses and add as an additional form the infinitive. It's very important to associate the infinitive with the indicative forms. So I think that you put them all on cards and then review them that way. And that will help you. So Farr has a very nice summary of the uses of the infinitive. And so he says, 6, the subject of an infinitive is usually in the accusative, but it may be omitted when it is the subject of the leading verb or its direct or indirect object. So if I said, the example, Apollo said that he was going to smite the Greeks, you would not have to repeat he in the accusative as the subject of the infinitive. Okay? Apollon epei, that he was going to, and you'd use the infinitive to express what he was saying he was going to do. So to read that again, the subject of an infinitive is usually in the accusative, but it may be omitted when it is the subject of the leading verb or its direct or indirect object. Number 7. The infinitive may be the subject of a verb, especially an impersonal one or esten. So we do this even in English. I say, to swim is good for one's health, using the infinitive as the subject of the verb. Este, is. Number 8. The infinitive may be the object of a verb, especially verbs indicating to wish, to command, to advise, to consent, to attempt, and the like. And here it's very helpful that English works the same way. I say, I wish to go to the ball. I command you to pick up that piece of paper. I advise you to stay away from him. Okay? I attempt to fly off the cliff. These types of expressions in English as well take an infinitive to complete them. And this is often the case here, that the way infinitives get used in Greek is not very far from the way they've continued to be used in English. So number 9. The infinitive may depend upon adjectives or substantives, especially those denoting ability, fitness, willingness, or those having similar meaning to verbs that take the infinitive. So again, in English we say, he's able to lift 300 pounds. He's fit to lead the army. He's willing to accept the responsibility. Here too, English works like Greek, and it's very helpful in comprehending these structures. 10. The infinitive may also express purpose. And we'll see this. We'll see this in the Iliad very soon. And the negative is may. The negative of the infinitive is may, as opposed to u, which is usually the negation of finite forms. Okay, number 11. The infinitive is used also to express a command with the nominative of the second person, or with the accusative of the third person for the subject, if expressed. The subject may be omitted. In this usage, it is equivalent of the imperative. And we're going to see this in the early bit of the Iliad when Chryses begs for his daughters to be released. He says he asks the Achaeans, to release his daughter. And the infinitive is used of the commands there. Okay, so that's a rough and ready introduction to the infinitive. Again, I encourage you to make flashcards that have the finite forms in the indicative of each tense, along with the form of the infinitive. And that will be very helpful in associating them and getting used to these infinitive forms, which are very important. So keep working hard, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.